There is a particular kind of political irony that only Washington can produce, where the weapons forged to destroy one set of enemies are eventually turned around and used against those who made them, where investigations launched to expose opponents end up illuminating the investigators, where files open to damage political rivals contain information that ricochets back with unexpected and devastating force. We are witnessing exactly this kind of moment right now. The Trump administration, which built much of its political brand on investigations, accusations, and the promise to finally hold the Clinton political machine accountable, is now reportedly in panic mode, as the Clintons and their allies have executed a counteroffensive that nobody saw coming, using bombshell files and strategic information releases to fundamentally change the political dynamic in Washington, and to put the administration on defense at precisely the moment it can least afford distraction. The story of how we arrived at this extraordinary moment requires understanding the long and bitter history between Donald Trump and the Clinton political dynasty. This rivalry did not begin with the 2016 election, though that contest gave it its most dramatic and consequential expression. The mutual animosity runs deep, rooted in decades of parallel ascent through American political life, in competing visions for the country, in personal interactions that generated lasting grievances on both sides. When Trump won the presidency in 2016, defeating Hillary Clinton in one of the most shocking electoral outcomes in modern American history, the victory was framed as not just a political defeat, but a repudiation of everything the Clinton brand represented. And from the moment of that victory, forces aligned with Trump began assembling and deploying information, allegations, and investigations aimed at ensuring the Clintons could never mount a political comeback and could potentially face criminal accountability for a list of alleged wrongdoings that had accumulated over decades. The Clinton email investigation, the questions about the Clinton Foundation's operations and financial practices, the Uranium One controversy, the allegations surrounding the Steele dossier. These were the weapons of a sustained political and legal offensive that consumed enormous resources and attention throughout Trump's first term and into his second. The goal was always twofold. First, to keep the Clintons permanently disabled as political threats. Second, to satisfy a base that had been promised accountability for a political establishment they viewed as corrupt and untouchable. The rallying cry of "Lock her up" was not merely a campaign slogan. It was a promise, and it was a promise that Trump's most passionate supporters never forgot and never stopped expecting him to fulfill. But something has changed. Something significant and potentially transformative has entered the political equation. The bombshell files that have now emerged represent information that the Clintons and their circle have apparently been holding in reserve, assembled and protected against exactly the kind of sustained political attack they have been facing. The strategic release of this material, timed with evident precision to coincide with a moment when the Trump administration is already battered by multiple simultaneous crises, represents either extraordinary political intelligence or remarkable opportunism, and possibly both. What the files contain and what they reveal about the intersection of power, money, and influence in American political life is now dominating conversations in congressional offices, in legal circles, and in media organizations, trying to determine what is authentic, what is significant, and what it means for the political landscape going forward. The Clintons have never been passive participants in political warfare. Throughout their decades in public life, they have developed a sophisticated understanding of how information flows through Washington, of how narratives are constructed and destroyed, of how timing and context can transform the meaning of even factual information. Bill Clinton survived impeachment through a combination of legal strategy, political coalition management, and relentless message discipline that his opponents consistently underestimated. Hillary Clinton survived decades of investigations, hearings, and opposition research campaigns that would have ended the careers of politicians with less resilience and fewer resources. The assumption that they would simply absorb the latest round of attacks without mounting a meaningful response was always more wishful thinking than realistic assessment. The Bombshell files themselves are described by those who have reviewed portions of them as containing information about financial transactions, political dealings, and personal conduct involving individuals across the political spectrum, not just figures aligned with the Trump administration, but a broader portrait of how power operates in Washington that implicates people in multiple political camps. The strategic value of such information is not necessarily in its immediate release, but in its existence and in the knowledge that it exists. The threat of disclosure, carefully managed and selectively deployed, can be as powerful a political tool as disclosure itself. And the Clintons, with their vast experience navigating Washington's information wars, understand this better than almost anyone. The Trump administration's reported panic is driven by several factors operating simultaneously. First, the files apparently contain information about matters that the administration would strongly prefer remain private. Details about financial dealings, about political arrangements, about personal conduct that could generate congressional investigations, legal proceedings, or simply devastating media coverage. Second, the timing of the information's emergence comes at a moment when the administration is already managing the Epstein file scandal, the ICE funding collapse, the government shutdown fallout, and multiple other crises that are consuming political capital and public attention. Adding another major scandal to this pile could be genuinely destabilizing. Third, the source of the counteroffensive matters enormously. The Clintons are not obscure political figures with limited platforms. They have access to legal resources, media relationships, and political networks that can amplify information with enormous speed and reach. The specific contents of the most explosive elements of these files remain partially unclear, as tends to be the case with genuinely sensitive political information in its early stages of public emergence. But multiple sources indicate that among the most significant materials are documents related to financial relationships between Trump Organization entities and foreign nationals during periods when those relationships would have had significant political implications. There are also reportedly communications, both documented and reconstructed through financial records, that suggest coordination between political operatives and foreign governments at moments when American foreign policy decisions were being made. And there are personal conduct allegations, supported by documentary evidence rather than mere accusation, that have the potential to generate significant legal exposure if referred to appropriate investigative bodies. The Clintons are not releasing this material randomly or through unofficial channels. The counteroffensive appears to be coordinated with legal advisors, with political strategists who understand how to maximize the impact of information releases, and with media organizations that have the resources to investigate and contextualize what they are being shown. This is not a leak. This is a campaign, and the difference between the two matters enormously. A leak can be dismissed, discredited, or buried. A coordinated campaign of disclosure, executed through legitimate channels with documentary support, is much harder to deflect. The political calculations on all sides are complex and high stakes. For the Clintons, the decision to go on offense represents a significant departure from the more defensive posture they have maintained during the years since Hillary's 2016 defeat. There were voices within their circle who counseled continued withdrawal from political combat, who argued that engagement would only elevate the attacks against them and that the best strategy was to let the Trump administration's own failures do the political work. The decision to reject that counsel and to deploy the Bombshell files suggests a judgment that the attacks have reached a level where continued passivity carries more risk than engagement, and that the current moment of administration vulnerability creates an opportunity that may not recur. For the Trump administration, the challenge is genuinely difficult. The political playbook that has worked effectively for years, attacking the Clintons, keeping them on defense, using the threat of prosecution and investigation as a political motivator for the base, is suddenly running in reverse. When the target of your attacks turns out to have been assembling a counteroffensive while you were focused on the assault, the strategic landscape changes completely. The administration must now decide whether to double down on Clinton attacks, risking that additional information will be released in response, or to de-escalate, which would itself be read as an admission that the files contain something genuinely damaging. Congressional Republicans find themselves in an uncomfortable position. Many have built their careers in significant part around Clinton accountability rhetoric. The promise that power would finally be held responsible for alleged past misconduct has been central to their appeal to their base constituencies. Now, with information emerging that complicates the simple narrative of Clinton guilt and Trump righteousness, they must figure out how to respond without either betraying their base or defending things that may genuinely be indefensible. The temptation to simply dismiss the new files as Clinton political attacks may be strong, but it carries the risk of appearing to apply a double standard that their own constituents will notice and resent. Democrats, watching this development unfold, are experiencing a mixture of vindication and caution. Vindication because the political world is finally getting a clearer picture of the information environment in which the Clinton attacks have operated for years. Caution because political counteroffensives, even successful ones, can generate unpredictable consequences, and because the Democrats' own position on issues of transparency and accountability requires them to apply consistent standards regardless of which party is being scrutinized. The media landscape is struggling to process these developments in real time. The challenge is significant. How do you distinguish between genuine bombshell information and strategic releases designed to create maximum political impact regardless of underlying substance? How do you report responsibly on files that are being strategically deployed as political weapons while ensuring that genuinely significant information receives appropriate public attention? The organizations handling this material are grappling with questions of verification, context, and timing that do not have easy answers. The experience of covering multiple previous information wars in Washington has made editors and reporters simultaneously more skeptical and more alert to the possibility that this time the material may be as significant as it is claimed. The legal dimensions of the Bombshell files are potentially the most consequential aspect of this entire development. If the documents contain evidence of criminal conduct by individuals currently in or close to the administration, the question of what happens to that evidence becomes urgent. Can it be submitted to appropriate investigative bodies? Would the current Justice Department, under its political leadership, pursue investigations that implicate administration allies? Would congressional oversight committees act on the information? And critically, are there independent legal channels through which the information could compel action regardless of the political calculations of those who control investigative institutions? These are not rhetorical questions. They have concrete answers that will be determined in the coming weeks and months through the actions of specific individuals in specific institutions. The question of whether American legal and political institutions are capable of responding to evidence of wrongdoing regardless of the political identity of those implicated is one of the most fundamental tests of democratic governance. The Bombshell files have placed that question at the center of the political conversation in a way that cannot easily be avoided or deflected. The international dimension of this political battle should not be overlooked. Foreign governments and intelligence services are watching this confrontation with enormous interest. The information contained in the Bombshell files reportedly touches on relationships and transactions with foreign nationals and foreign entities, and the governments of those nations have their own calculations about what serves their interests as this material enters the public sphere. Some may seek to manage the narrative around their involvement. Others may see advantage in certain aspects of the information becoming more fully known. The intersection of domestic political warfare and international interests is a recurring feature of modern American politics, and this confrontation is no exception. For ordinary Americans who have been following the long and exhausting Clinton-Trump political warfare over the years, these developments are likely to generate a range of responses. Committed partisans on each side will interpret the information through the lens of their existing commitments, seeing confirmation of what they already believed and discounting whatever challenges their preferred narrative. But there is also a significant portion of the public that is genuinely interested in accountability without partisan preference, that wants to know what is actually true and what will actually be done about it, regardless of which party is implicated. It is this portion of the public whose response to the Bombshell files could prove politically decisive. The Trump administration's panic, to whatever extent it reflects genuine concern rather than managed political communication, suggests that those closest to the situation believe the files contain something real, something that cannot simply be dismissed or spun away. Panic is an interesting political signal because it is usually unintentional. Politicians and their advisors are skilled at projecting calm and confidence even in difficult circumstances. When panic becomes visible or is reported by multiple sources, it typically means that the situation has exceeded the capacity of normal crisis management tools to contain. What happens in the immediate future will depend on decisions being made right now in multiple locations by multiple actors. Will the Clintons continue the controlled release of information, or will they hold further material in reserve for strategic deployment? Will the Trump administration attempt some kind of legal or political action to stop or discredit the release? Will congressional investigations be opened? Will the Justice Department face pressure to act? Will international actors intervene in ways that complicate the domestic political picture? All of these variables are in play simultaneously, creating a political situation of genuine unpredictability and high stakes. The fundamental question underlying all of this is whether the rules that have governed American political combat for decades still apply, whether there are still norms and constraints that prevent the complete weaponization of information in service of political destruction, or whether we have entered a new phase where information warfare operates without meaningful limits. The Bombshell files and the panic they have reportedly generated in the administration are symptoms of a political culture where the distinction between legitimate accountability and destructive information warfare has become dangerously blurred. Whatever the specific contents of these files, whatever their ultimate impact on specific individuals and specific political careers, they represent something larger about the moment we are living through. American politics has entered a phase where the accumulated information about the exercise of power by those who have held it for decades is beginning to surface in ways that are difficult to control and impossible to fully predict. The Clintons turning the tables on Trump is not just a story about two political dynasties in conflict. It is a story about what happens when the information wars that have defined American politics reach a stage where no one can be certain of controlling the outcome. In that uncertainty lies both danger and the possibility, however fragile, of something approaching genuine accountability for everyone involved.